Thank you so much for all you do. It simply wouldn't work without you, and thank you for going on to inspire so many young people. To all the supporters here today, thank you.
For decades, Prince Edward was considered the quietest member of the House of Windsor. Unlike his older brothers, he rarely dominated headlines, avoided public controversies, and built a reputation as the royal who simply carried out his duties without complaint. But behind that calm image, a very different story was developing, one involving promises, legal documents, family loyalty, and a battle over what could and could not be taken away. In 2026, a shocking development reportedly sent waves through royal circles. According to claims surrounding the situation, lawyers representing Prince Edward presented a carefully prepared case that challenged questions over his royal inheritance, his family's agreements, and the future of properties and personal gifts connected to his late parents, Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. The revelation stunned observers because Edward had never been viewed as someone who would challenge the institution. He had spent most of his life avoiding conflict, staying away from scandals, and supporting the monarchy quietly from the background. But this time, the situation was different. This was not simply about a disagreement between family members. It was about whether promises made by one monarch could be questioned by another. It was about whether private gifts from a former sovereign could later be reconsidered. And most importantly, it raised a much bigger question. How much power does a reigning monarch truly have over decisions made by the monarch who came before? To understand why this moment became so significant, we have to go back to the final years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign. By the beginning of the 2020s, the royal family had experienced some of its most difficult challenges in modern history. Prince Andrew's controversies had created a serious crisis for the institution. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's departure from official royal duties had transformed the public image of the family. The Queen, who had spent more than 70 years protecting the reputation of the monarchy, witnessed a period of uncertainty unlike anything she had faced before. But throughout those difficult years, one person remained consistent: Prince Edward. He continued appearing at engagements, supporting charitable causes, and representing the crown. He avoided dramatic interviews and rarely responded to criticism. While other members of the family were caught in public disputes, Edward maintained a steady presence. And that loyalty did not go unnoticed. Queen Elizabeth II had always valued duty. She understood that the survival of the monarchy depended not only on tradition but also on reliability. In her final years, Edward and his wife Sophie became two of the family members she trusted deeply. For Elizabeth, the legacy of her husband Prince Philip was especially important. The Duke of Edinburgh title was more than just a royal title. It represented Philip's entire lifetime of service. For more than 7 decades, he stood beside the Queen, supporting her reign while creating his own identity within the monarchy. After Philip's death, the question became, who would continue that legacy? The answer eventually became Prince Edward. In 2023, King Charles III officially granted Edward the title of Duke of Edinburgh, continuing the connection between Philip's life's work and his youngest son. Publicly, the announcement appeared to be a moment of family unity. It seemed like a respectful tribute from one generation to another. But behind the ceremony was a much more complicated story. Because attached to the future of the Edinburgh title was something else: the question of Edward's home, Bagshot Park. Located near Windsor, Bagshot Park is one of the most recognizable royal residences. The historic estate includes a large mansion surrounded by extensive grounds, and for years it has been the home of Edward and Sophie. But when Edward first moved there in the late 1990s, the property was not the polished royal residence people imagine today. The building required significant work. Instead of simply receiving a fully maintained royal home, Edward reportedly took responsibility for major improvements. The property needed restoration, repairs, and modernization. Over the years, millions were invested into bringing it back to a suitable standard. Unlike the image many people have of royal life, Edward's arrangement involved substantial personal financial responsibility. He did not simply move in and enjoy the benefits of a palace residence. He invested. He maintained. He committed himself to the property. And according to reports surrounding the dispute, Edward's legal team argued that these long-term commitments created a strong foundation for his rights regarding the estate. The argument was simple: agreements were made, payments were completed, and legal documents existed to support those arrangements. The situation became even more complicated after King Charles III began reshaping the monarchy. When Charles became king, one of his major goals was creating what was described as a smaller, more streamlined royal institution. The idea was to reduce costs, focus on senior working royals, and modernize the structure of the monarchy. But any attempt to reduce the size of an institution as old as the British monarchy comes with difficult decisions. Questions began emerging about royal residences, financial arrangements, and the future roles of different family members. And according to claims surrounding Edward's situation, Bagshot Park became part of those discussions. For Edward, however, this was not simply about a house. It was about security. It was about agreements that had existed for decades. And it was about whether a decision made by Queen Elizabeth II could later be changed. This is where the legal battle reportedly became much more serious. Edward's lawyers did not approach the issue emotionally. Instead, they focused on documentation. Years of records. Financial agreements. Property arrangements. Official paperwork. The argument was that the foundation of Edward's position was not based on family relationships or royal favor. It was based on legally recognized agreements. And then another issue reportedly entered the discussion: the personal jewelry of Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. For many years, Sophie had worn a distinctive tiara connected to her wedding and her relationship with Queen Elizabeth II. The piece was not simply viewed as jewelry. It represented a personal bond between two women. Sophie had developed an unusually close relationship with the late Queen, and many observers noted the affection between them. In public moments, Sophie often appeared less like a distant royal relative and more like a trusted member of Elizabeth's inner circle. So when questions reportedly emerged about ownership and classification of certain royal items, the issue became deeply personal. Edward's legal team argued that gifts given privately by the Queen could not simply be transformed into institutional property later. The bigger concern was the precedent. If a personal gift from a monarch could later be reviewed, questioned, or reclaimed, then where would the boundary be? Would other gifts given during Elizabeth's reign face similar questions? Would personal decisions made by a monarch remain protected after their death? These questions created tension because they went beyond Edward and Sophie. They challenged the meaning of royal promises themselves. And as the dispute grew, another member of the family began paying close attention. Princess Anne. Known for her direct personality and strong sense of duty, and has always been one of the most respected members of the royal family. She has built a reputation for hard work, discipline, and loyalty to the institution. Unlike many royals, and has never been interested in popularity contests. She focuses on service. And according to the claims surrounding this dramatic story, Anne's involvement changed the entire atmosphere. Because for Anne, this was not simply a disagreement between brothers. It was about the credibility of the monarchy. If documents signed by one monarch could be ignored later, what did that mean for the authority of future royal decisions? The question was no longer just about Edward. It was about the foundation of the institution itself. As the situation intensified, Prince Edward found himself in a position nobody expected. The quiet prince who had spent decades avoiding controversy was suddenly standing at the center of one of the most significant internal disputes the modern royal family had faced. And this time he was prepared. Because unlike public battles fought through interviews and headlines, Edward's fight was built on something much harder to challenge: the paperwork. As the pressure increased behind palace walls, Prince Edward's position became stronger than many people expected. For years, Edward had been viewed as the least threatening member of the royal family. He was not seen as a rival for attention, influence, or power. He stayed away from dramatic confrontations and rarely challenged decisions publicly. But that image of a quiet prince had caused many people to underestimate him. Because while Edward avoided the spotlight, he was quietly building something far more powerful: a record. Every agreement, every payment, every official document, every decision connected to his family's arrangements had been preserved. And when questions were raised, Edward did not respond with emotion. He responded with evidence. The most important argument from his legal team centered around the idea that the promises made by Queen Elizabeth II were not temporary arrangements that could simply disappear after her death. They argued that her decisions represented the authority of a sovereign and that those decisions deserved to be respected. For Edward, this was not about demanding special treatment. It was about protecting commitments that had already been made. The situation reportedly created a difficult position for King Charles III, because Charles was not simply dealing with his younger brother. He was dealing with decisions made by his own mother. Queen Elizabeth II had spent decades protecting the reputation of the crown. Her word carried enormous importance, and questioning her decisions created a complicated problem for the institution itself. If a future monarch could easily reverse the actions of a previous monarch, then what happened to continuity? What happened to trust? The monarchy depends heavily on tradition and stability. Every generation inherits not only titles and responsibilities, but also the decisions of those who came before. That is what made Edward's argument so powerful. It was not simply saying, "This belongs to me." It was saying, "This was decided already." And that distinction changed everything. The legal discussions reportedly became even more complicated when the issue of Sophie's tiara entered the picture. The jewelry had become a symbol of the relationship between Sophie and Queen Elizabeth II. Unlike famous pieces associated with major royal ceremonies, this item represented something more personal. It represented trust. It represented family. And Edward's legal representatives reportedly argued that the Queen had clearly intended it to remain a private gift. The argument challenged the idea that historical connections alone could change ownership. A piece of jewelry containing materials from earlier royal collections did not automatically become a crown asset, they argued. A gift was still a gift. The question created uncomfortable possibilities for the wider royal family. Because if personal gifts from a monarch could later be questioned, then many other private possessions could potentially face similar scrutiny. The situation reportedly reached a point where Princess Anne became involved. Anne's reputation inside the royal family has always been unique. She is not known for carefully crafted public statements or political-style diplomacy. She is known for saying what she believes. For decades, she has maintained one of the strongest connections to the traditional values of royal service. And according to the claims surrounding this story, Anne believed the issue had moved beyond Edward and Sophie. She believed it had become a question about whether the promises of the monarchy still meant something. Her argument was reportedly straightforward. A royal institution built on history cannot choose which historical decisions it respects. A signature cannot matter only when it is convenient. A promise cannot be important only when circumstances are favorable. This reportedly placed King Charles III in an extremely difficult position. Supporting a challenge against Edward's arrangements risked appearing as though he was ignoring decisions made by his own mother. But stepping back meant accepting that some choices made before his reign were beyond his control. The situation highlighted one of the biggest challenges facing any monarch. A king has enormous authority, but that authority exists within a system built by previous generations. The crown is not only about power. It is also about continuity. And continuity requires respecting the past. As the legal review continued, Edward's position reportedly became increasingly difficult to challenge. His supporters pointed to decades of responsibility. They argued that he and Sophie had represented the monarchy faithfully, maintained their residence responsibly, and avoided the controversies that had damaged the institution's image. Unlike other royal disputes that played out through public accusations and media battles, Edward's approach remained quiet. He did not attack. He did not make public demands. He allowed the documents to speak. And that may have been his greatest advantage. Because inside royal institutions, where reputation and tradition matter enormously, paperwork can sometimes be more powerful than publicity. Eventually, according to the claims surrounding this dramatic story, the pressure reached a turning point. The arguments presented by Edward's legal team reportedly forced a reconsideration of the situation. The message was clear. The agreements surrounding Edward and Sophie could not simply be rewritten. The commitments made by Queen Elizabeth II carried weight. The arrangements connected to the Duke of Edinburgh title, the property, and personal gifts remained protected. For Edward, the outcome represented something much bigger than a personal victory. It was proof that preparation mattered. It showed that the quietest members of an institution can sometimes be the most prepared. But the consequences inside the royal family were complicated. Even if everyone continued appearing together at official events, the relationship between Charles and Edward would likely be changed by what happened. Because family disagreements can be repaired. But institutional disagreements leave memories. Behind palace doors, everyone would understand what had happened. A prince who had spent his life supporting the monarchy had eventually been forced to defend himself using the same system he had served for decades. And that created a powerful message for the next generation of royals. For Edward's children, James and Louise, the lesson would be unforgettable. They saw their father avoid public conflict. They saw him refuse dramatic statements. They saw him rely on facts instead of emotions. They saw that loyalty and preparation could exist together. The story also revealed something important about the modern monarchy. The institution may appear united from the outside, but inside it is constantly balancing tradition, family relationships, financial realities, and public expectations. Every decision creates consequences. Every promise creates responsibility. And every generation must decide how much of the past it is willing to preserve. Prince Edward spent decades being underestimated. He was the prince who stayed quiet. The prince who avoided controversy. The prince who rarely demanded attention. But when the moment arrived, he was ready. Because he understood something that many people inside powerful institutions eventually learn. Respect is not protected by status alone. It is protected by evidence, by commitment, and by keeping the promises that were made. Whether every detail of this dramatic royal dispute becomes known publicly or remains behind palace walls, one thing is certain: Prince Edward's role within the Windsor family has been viewed differently. The quiet prince became the prince who stood his ground. And the documents that supported his position became a reminder that even inside a monarchy built on tradition, the written word still carries extraordinary power.